These are the different categories of HDAs I've created. So I've created a suite of HDAs to provide look dev, scene composition, rendering, and I've created 3 utility HDAs. One of those overlaps with the scene HDAs. So first I'm going to go over the look setup. This is the look dev setup. So I've got 7 HDAs making this work. The first node is the look import node. This is responsible for importing the geometry. It can be FBX or OBJ or USD. It'll all work. You can set the asset name here, but in the future that's going to be moved over to COG and done automatically. When you do select new import geometry, it'll ask you what type to import it as. Each of these types change parameters automatically, so you don't have to worry about it, such as scale, and it handles prefixes for our Maya formats. By default, the rigged model will not have a proxy, because when looking at the alive setup, they didn't use proxies for their animated characters, so I decided to do the same. We can add a proxy though, if we want to, by turning off the simple interface and changing the proxy mode to another setting. The transforms get baked into the model, so you don't have to worry about misaligned X-forms. You can align the model, or change if it gets subdivided or UV'd. The next node is the P4 controller. This just lets you manage the HIP file without going back and forth between perforce and managing change lists, and it'll handle the whole process in the background. The next node is the look materials. This one's not too complicated. It's just material library and assigned materials slapped together with a couple of things added on top, like default material, layer management, and the ability for me to add something like a clay shader. The look preview node sets up an environment for turnarounds. For ZBrush renders, you can turn on a stand. You can also quickly change the proxy or render modes. You can change the background. Right now I just have a simple background in a Cave Academy background, but I plan on adding more in the future. This node sets up the camera, and you can mess with the scale and change the camera separately. Because this is designed to be artist-facing, I didn't want to have a large section of lights that might overwhelm artists. So I created this look lights. You can go inside, set up the lights you want, or you can use one of the presets that is provided. And it'll just copy in, and you can configure it exactly how you want and delete any lights or edit any lights you want. The presets can be easily added by just going over here, adding a new template, changing the name, and it'll show up in the menu. After editing the camera, you can go over to the look render. This is for rendering out turntables. So you can change the number of steps in each stage. You can also toggle on and off each stage. By default, it'll do 1 asset turn, 1 light turn, and 1 wireframe turn. But you can turn off any of these options. If you just want to do an asset, then a wireframe, that's possible. Or if you just want wireframe, you can do that too. There's different types of wireframes, but I prefer the physical one. I started work on a light cage setup that one of my artists requested, but I haven't finished it yet. When you're ready, you can just click the render button and it'll render out 24 frames of your turnaround, or you can turn off stepping and it'll just render all of them. Look export is for authoring your file. All you have to do is set the changeless description and click save to disk. Since this node has Perforce integration, it'll publish all of the files for you. Let's take a look at scene composition and rendering. The scene load asset tool makes it easy. You can select from a drop-down, and it'll give you an option to select from any of the published assets. You can also select assets from this Qt interface. You can search for a specific asset, and you can select multiple assets at a time. This scene load asset is meant to load the set. The set holds the default primitives, a scan of the environment, and HDRIs, but it can be loaded with more. This is your default environment. On the right, we load our characters and our static assets. Once we load in our character, we can load in our animation with the scene load anim node. This node will automatically extract animations from maya.mb files. It'll take the animation from Maya and properly format it. From here, we set up our lights. You can select from the drop-down any of the available HDRIs in the HDRI prim. You can go inside and set up your lights just like the look light setup. You can also set up LPE tags here. All layers for this setup will be configured automatically, so you don't have to worry about those. The render camera is still in early stages, but I plan on adding more features later on. As it stands, it loads in the camera that is appropriate for the scene. Next is the scene export node. This node exports a USD file and brings it back in for rendering. This way we can just export render settings later on without having to re-export every single layer. This section is the rendering stage. Rendering is done with layers. For each layer you can independently decide which render engine you want to use and which assets you want to include. You can select AOVs. I've made it easy to include deep, PREF, and crypto mats with just a toggle so the users don't have to think about all the settings. Each layer will render with the same settings unless you overwrite one of the defaults. Renders will be automatically versioned so you don't overwrite old renders, but you can manually change the version if you'd like to. Different layers can have different engines, overrides, AOVs, or exclusions. Each layer has its own name, which can help you identify it when selecting which layer to render in COG. You can select to export as a USD file to render with Husk, or you can render directly using the render button. The render export node allows you to select multiple layers at a time to render. And here's a look at the utilities. This is the camera formatter. Our problem was that the cameras were the wrong scale, and doing this in Solaris got a little messy, so I created this tool that would properly scale it and rename it and bake all the curves and then bring it into Houdini. It can do all of the cameras at once, or it can just do one at a time. I wanted to design a tool that would allow us to easily bring in new animations, because I figured animations it's an iterative process, they're going to be updated all the time, so I really wanted to make that process as easy as possible. So I made this tool. The way it works is you point it to a .mb file and then just click a button and it'll extract the animation from that MB file. It creates a headless Maya standalone instance and runs some Python that'll format it properly, export it. Works pretty well for what we need it for. It exports from Maya as an Alembic, and then we bring it into Houdini, it does some formatting on it, and then exports as a USD. I did this just to avoid any messiness with the Maya USD formatting. Last off is COG. This is my pipeline interface. Some of the features it has is automatic updating, environment wrappers for opening files and creating environment variables based on the shot and any other information I might want to include, and external rendering, so you can render without opening Houdini. So you can use it to create shots, you can edit shots, you can open Houdini or Maya from here. I'm still working on just file management and Perforce integration. I'm also still working on the assets, but let's look at some of the functionality. The main purpose of this is to open shots. We can open a shot here, and it's going to load in a bunch of environment variables that we use in all of our tools. Most of these HDAs are relying on these environment variables to know what to do. For example, this render camera, it doesn't have any inputs, it's reading those environment variables to decide which camera to look at. If we instead load up COG through the terminal, we can see which environment variables are being loaded. So stuff like project root, the start and end frames, the shot number, FPS, resolution, that kind of thing. To create a new shot, we can add it with this add button, or we can edit an existing shot. So this shot, we can change the FPS from 30 to 24. You can see it updates over here. We can also move shots around. So I could change this to, if I try to change this to an existing shot, it won't let me. But I can try moving it over to shot 130. And if we go to our shots directory, we can see it's changed from 120 to 130, and then all of the metadata for that has changed as well. On the right is our files panel. So this is how artists will be able to manipulate files with Perforce integration in the future. They can also open up Maya from here if they want to. So far, the Perforce integration is limited to just looking at the status. So this is unopened. It hasn't been submitted to Perforce, but this file is opened. On the far right is the shot panel. So we can see information about this shot, and that's all just can be edited in this edit menu. You can also search for a specific shot. This search is more helpful in the assets page. And currently the config page doesn't do anything. You can also render shots through the interface. When you select render, it'll scan for layer nodes and read the names of those layers. You can select which layer you want to render specifically.